Hello, this is Shoshana Brigette from ColorKarma.com. I am here with Ryan Stanley from PVH.
Hello.
Ryan, thank you for joining us. Ryan is the color specialist, color leader, material and specialist for PVH brands. And for
Yep.
those who don't know, we have Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Heritage Brands, and a whole bunch of other under that PVH. So designers typically prefer to touch and feel color.
That's
But
true.
when they go to physically create it, they go through the roundabout, or what do we call it? The
Roundabout
cycle
of
of
death,
hell,
I think. Yeah.
vortex of hell,
Yeah.
where they keep getting swatches back. That's not the right color. That's not the right color. That's not the right color. And so some of the tools out there is digitizing the whole design process. So how do we help designers and show them how to digitize color? Yeah.
Well, first, I think there's the opportunity in design and historically having aesthetic references to the color that they want versus production and execution, where they have to have more of a defined measurable tolerance in order
Mhm.
to execute whatever standard they might otherwise have been given. So at some point it has to migrate from an aesthetic reference to a legitimate standard that can be measured for production purposes, right? Because
Right.
you have to know what you're making, and it has to meet certain quality tolerances, right? So there's the roundabout of death, or that we're
Is
talking about
here's
here,
the
right?
color I want, and it goes on the material. It's not the color I want, and you go back and forth.
Right. So typically you have designers who are subscribing to, if they're doing anything digital, it's probably just trend services, right?
Hmm.
Um, WGSN, the like. So they go online, they look at the various trend services. Very
Yep.
few that I talk to nowadays actually subscribe to physical trend tools, but some of them still do.
Hmm.
And then, though, they still spend time. So then you have a break in design, right? Where you have
Right.
some of them who are comfortable in digital color a little bit, but
Hmm.
don't necessarily have that extended understanding of it moving into execution. And then you have the ones who are just straight analog. They might use
Physical.
digital tools like WGSN and things like that, but then they go to their Pantone Swatchbook or Chroma
Yep.
or CSI or
Hmm.
Color or somebody, and they try to put it together visually, right?
They're going to their Pantone book, or you said CSI or
Yeah.
Color, all these other physical standards. But those standards are a point in time on a specific dye with specific pigments
Right.
on a specific material, which is part of the challenge of you're trying to recreate something there. And when you go to manufacturing now, you've locked in your material, you've locked in your dyes and pigments and the behaviors that those characteristics are tied to it. And so digitizing and characterizing it allows you to make something that's repeatable and measurable, right?
If done
Because
right. Yeah.
if
If done
done
right.
correct,
So,
because who wants to produce hundreds of thousands of shirts that vary from sleeve to the top to the back, right? Even
well,
if it's a small variation.
look at salesman samples for most retailers and brands. That is exactly that, right?
Right.
You don't necessarily know exactly what you want. It can't be properly visualized virtually. So you
Right.
have to partner with your mills and vendors to create whatever their minimum runs are on
Hmm.
however many different colorways you might want of a style. And then the retailers and brands have to figure out what to do with all of this extra stuff that maybe wasn't picked up. So yeah, it's incredibly wasteful. Forget the whole them wasting time trying to figure out um, what those physicals are in translation to whatever trend services they came from and
Hmm.
everything else like that.
Right.
Uh, but then you have to actually, exactly to your point, then you have to actually make all that stuff because they're used to seeing it physically. And
Hmm.
then, okay, what do I do with it? So it's millions of dollars in waste. Yeah, not to mention
It's
time.
it's millions of dollars in waste. It's millions of dollars in creating multiple types of standards also that are maybe a specific blue standards in one division for that year, but a similar blue that is very close is in another division.
Well, there's the other piece, right? So
That's a
again,
yeah.
again, that we go back to design aesthetic, though, right? And
Hmm.
that's why I think unless a physical standard, which to your point a second ago is like a snapshot in time, right? The second you
Hmm.
produce something, it starts to degrade.
Right.
Expose it to light, handling, whatever else, it's a snapshot in time. If that is not accompanied by digital data,
Digital
reflectance
data.
data that
Yep.
can be used throughout the entirety of the supply chain, and even
Hmm.
upstream, I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, but even to design it can be used if shown correctly, then you're not dealing with the same thing. If you just have a standard and it doesn't have data, in my mind, that might as well. That's no different than an aesthetic reference.
Exactly. And every day is going to be different. Every view, I mean, trying to just explain, our moods, what we eat, what we do, how much we sleep, all affects our visual colors.
Right.
And so now we're making a decision. Now we're trying to communicate a color based off a physical standard who somebody else is going to see slightly differently
Yeah.
from day to day in different light, different conditions on a sample that will continue to degrade.
Yeah.
So you have to digitize it at some point in time if it's something you want to produce on a scale, as
Yeah.
opposed to one off and you're making one shade of red and no one cares because you're only making one. So that's kind of the challenge. So in PVH, how do you handle the digitization of color? I opened the cans of worms.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the quote? I'm big on quotes. You eat an elephant one bite at a time, right?
Yep.
So one of the big things for PVH was we could spend time partnering with design from the very beginning, but if in execution it couldn't roll through, then it was just going to fall flat on its face. So
Right.
we've spent the last year or so really partnering with the execution group, partnering with our global color teams to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to execute things digitally.
Hmm.
One of the pitfalls that we fell into as a brand was managing things, and I'm sure every business has this opportunity, right? We were managing things very compartmentalized, right? We were looking at each individual brand, which is good, for
Right.
brand identity. But when you're trying to streamline processes and procedures and things like that, you took a step back and said, let's pay attention to this by function, right?
Hmm.
So we looked at organizing all of our custom colors, all of our standard colors. So now we have every single color standard that might be looked at by any of our brands. We have that mapped out digitally. So, i.e., we have reflectance data for every single color standard in our system. Have those color standards both in color evaluation software and in our internal PLM systems.
Hmm.
So, if somebody in one brand develops a color or identifies a new color, for whatever reason, now that color is available to all of PVH, to all of the brands. And more importantly, when it rolls to Egypt or ISC, India subcontinent, or China or Hong Kong or
Hmm.
Europe or here in the States, now as it pertains to execution, we're all paying attention to the exact same thing. It's not
Right.
some random
Uh,
swatch.
objective
Yeah, well, but
swatch.
even digitally, it potentially has to be done right, right? So
Yeah.
instead of taking a swatch that you got from Pantone or Archroma and reading it on a Spectro and saying, okay, now I have the digital data for that. No, you have a digital reading of the swatch that you just read in.
Correct.
So now we have the correct digital data from the color standards providers in a
Hmm.
centralized system, and all of our team members globally can now access it. The benefit that comes from that, and going back to our previous conversation a little bit,
Hmm.
tell me at any point to be
No.
quiet, is now we can begin to extrapolate some of the required tools and metrics that design might require upstream, but
Hmm.
now it's based on defined data. Right. So
Right.
instead of each designer having their own color palettes on their individual computer, we can publish a master. I'm just making this up. We can publish a master ASE file, for example, Adobe Swatch
Right.
Exchange file that they can dump into Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever else. everybody's looking at the exact same thing. Now it's all based on that standard reflectance data. It's extrapolated off of that reflectance data under the correct illuminant that they might need. It's defined color space, right? Whether it be, Adobe RGB, wide gamut RGB, sRGB,
Right.
hexadecimal, whatever else.
LAB.
Now, exactly. Now it's in the format that they need for whatever software that they might be using for design, and it's standardized. So
Yep.
designer A, designer B, designer C, anywhere in the world is looking at the same data.
Same color, and can produce and communicate the same color requirements.
Bingo. Yeah.
And that's really important. And one of the things I always hear is, well, you're limiting my creativity. And what I try and explain is, you're not limiting the creativity, you're actually enhancing and giving you more capabilities to create.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a designer just a few days ago, actually, or I think it was the end of last week, actually, where so we're talking about, the world is a different place now. Have lived through COVID-19, things like that. A lot of the team members across, the industry are working remotely. How can I, as a designer, have my color library that had been typically at the office? And so a bit of a silver lining. You have to find a silver lining in any situation, right? Walking back and talking to them and saying, you have tens of thousands of colors at your fingertips now. How long would it have taken you to sift through,
all those
23,
swatches,
2,400 Pantones, 3,600 some odd CSI colors, over 4,000 or chroma colors. It would take you forever to sift through all that stuff. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They probably didn't look at all those standards or look through all those standards. They looked at whatever one they were comfortable with. Now, with the libraries done digitally, they have the ability to quickly search through thousands of colors.
Whole library, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And for somebody who doesn't work at some of these big organizations, when we talk about these colors and these swatches, it's like walking into a library. It's walls and walls of physical swatches that are tagged and associated with each season, each material, each vendor. And so it's a giant library to go through and say, well, which book do I want to read? Which color do I want? And then having to go through that. We're now digitally, and to your point, COVID, we're all digital. I can access all of this, look at it from a quick visual range to say I'm looking for oranges or reds, and pull it out, and then start making decisions and understanding it. And it's the triangulation of understanding the DNA of the color, which includes the material and characteristics of the material, and the kind of the technology as well of how it's being used. And that's why color, when you use it as a swatch, as a point in time in a reference standard, is very different than a production. You need those three things to really understand what color is from a production capabilities.
Right. Well, I don't disagree with you at all, but I think that at some point, there was a guy here at PVH who said something along the lines of, we have to identify the swim lanes. We have to dredge the swamp where those swim lanes cross over across the different teams, right? I think what you just said, design, if they're interested, fine, that's fantastic. But that's not necessarily something that they should or might need to think about, right? If it's cleaned up and done right, it's just my opinion, they should be able to easily, quickly search their colors, ideally digitally, right? Be comfortable in what colors can be displayed accurately on screen versus those that can't.
Right.
Understand, we haven't talked about this yet, understand how to still be creative in that. So if I want to come up with a brand new color, I can do that. If I want to mess around with RGB values or whatever system I'm working in and come up with a brand new color, how to either identify, is it a new color or does it fall within tolerances of existing color? Tolerances of an existing color. But then once a standard has been established, once you partner with your execution team to say, here's the color standard I want, it existed, or here's a brand new one, what does it match? Is it new? Create me a standard. But once that's done, have them have faith in the system such that they can let go of it. And
Right.
then execution can take the reins and manage it through, and it doesn't have to constantly go back to design. Allow
Hmm.
design to be designers.
Right.
They don't necessarily have to understand delta tolerances and various digital metrics in order to understand if their lab dips or production actually matches that digital standard.
And it's having the confidence that once it's digitized and handed off to production for execution, they can focus on designing, on creating.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think typically that swamp, right, that I mentioned earlier, that
Hmm.
had occurred because of lack of trust.
Right.
I constantly get a best can do for technical limitations or timing limitations because I'm going from a cotton knit swatch or a cotton woven swatch, and I'm trying to execute it on a polyamide or a nylon or polyester and things like that. And I'm always getting something that isn't the exact standard that I want because we haven't necessarily defined all of that beforehand. We haven't
Beforehand.
communicated all that beforehand. So now they feel the need to constantly double check and make sure. Whereas
Hmm.
going forward, if we define what colors are achievable across various substrates, provide them that information digitally upstream
Hmm.
in a way that they can digest as design, that sort of, to your point earlier, it actually sets them free. It enables them to see more colors, to have
Hmm.
confidence in when they do pick a color, it can
Yep.
actually be executed on the materials pertinent to the brand.
Right.
And if they do happen to stumble upon a brand new color or want to search the entire library for a color to differentiate,
Hmm.
now they can do that with
Now that,
actual
yep.
data. Now they know it's brand new.
Exactly. Exactly. And on top of it, it's building that trust in that relationship, being able to design and have the freedom to create. And to your point, the best can do. Who wants to hear that when they come back?
Yeah.
Well, that's the best I can do. Well, we ran out of time. We ran out of money.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be great if I designed it from the start and said, yeah, we're ready to go next week? Well, because I've worked within the framework
Yeah.
of what I can do and what is capable and trying. And I think one of the examples you and I always give, because it's an easy one, is trying to put, you know, bright fluorescence on cotton.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen, guys. You can keep cycling through this. And yes, it's an obvious example, but that's a very obvious example of why it doesn't work and why you're so limited to the pigments and the materials to
Mm-hmm.
get the color. So instead of spending weeks trying to find the supplier who can produce, fluorescent pinks on cotton,
Yeah.
you go, oh, I can't do it. Here's the materials you can. Here's the price points we can. Here's the vendors. Here's how quickly they can go to market.
Yeah.
Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Start designing. Go for it.
Again, though, with trust, right? I think
Yep.
historically, design, because they were bleeding into that execution swim lane,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the suppliers separately just want to do something as quickly as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the suppliers weren't being held, the mills and vendors, if they weren't being held to a digital standard, sometimes they could get away with being able to match a color or not being able to match a color. And therein, that just compounded the mistrust, right? If
Mm-hmm.
a miller, a vendor, a supplier didn't necessarily want to get new dyes in house or didn't necessarily want to make another run to match it accurately to the specified digital tolerances,
Right.
they're just, design's going to look at it and, I know John, and John's just going to say yes to it or whatever else. Then a designer turns around and is like, you didn't match the color that I had requested.
Yep.
Because everything had been done visually, had been
Right.
done subjectively.
Mm-hmm.
So now they feel the need even more so to double check and to see and to make sure over and over and over again. So it goes kind of both ways, right? It's not just educating the design groups into what can be done and how digital can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly why PVH focused on the execution team first. It's making
Right.
sure that the execution team is aware of what those digital tolerances mean and how to use them accurately globally, as well as put pressure on mills, vendors, global suppliers to, be in the 20th century. Or the 21st century. It's 2020. I'll continue to shake my head on how spectrophotometers have been in the industry for the past 20 plus years, more even,
More.
and people still don't even know what they are or
I was going to
how to
say,
use them.
Most people still don't know how to use a spectrophotometer, and there's different scales, and it's no different than buying a car, right? There's an
Yeah.
entry-level car and a high-end car. So, there's little handhelds, there's stuff you can use
Yeah,
on your phone,
colorimeters all the way up to
colorimeters,
multi-angled spectral cameras. Yeah.
right? And it depends on the application and budget and things of that nature. But digitizing in partnership is the step one. And
Mhm.
you know, is that happening inside PVH? Do you have designers now coming to you saying, how's that relationship going? Is
Very
what I'm
much so. Yeah,
asking.
yeah. I mean, and it has only been accelerated. So PVH was very fortunate in that we were able to hit locking down the global color team, locking down the execution in regards to digital color, getting in good partners like Natific,
Hmm.
Data Color, X-Rite, to partner with our overseas mills and vendors as well as ourselves,
Right.
for hardware, software services, and things like that. Um, and that happened a few months before all of this, the global pandemic and things like that.
Hmm.
So again, trying to find a silver lining in a bad situation. Um, the pandemic has only accelerated the need for design to be able
Hmm.
to utilize these tools.
Yep.
Again, just last week I had mentioned, partnering with our different brands, sending them approved digital files that they can use in Photoshop and Illustrator and Adobe and the different softwares that we're using, all based on the reflectance data, partnering with the teams so they can see all the colors, select the colors within our PLM system. And now we can start to do, once they get comfortable with that piece,
Hmm.
now we can start to do, I'm a dork, right? So I like, what I say is fun stuff. You know, hey, okay, design, you have random RGB values, or you have random hex values, depending upon the software that you're working in. You have just, a snapshot of a color of an image or whatever else like that. Okay, you can give it to me, or I can give you software, and now we can quickly search across our library and ideally pick a color standard from the very beginning.
Right.
Or if we don't have a color standard, identify how to create one as quickly as possible. And even, again, I'm going to sound like a spokesperson for Natific, but partner with some of these new services and create a digital color from the very beginning, right? If we
Hmm.
can digitize a color with globally available dyes and chemicals and know it's achievable across the various materials for our brands,
Yep.
then why would we potentially waste time to,
Exactly.
4 to 6 weeks to develop that physical standard, when now for all of those mills and vendors and our global execution team, if we're drilled into being able to do it digitally and we know it can be achieved on our
Hmm.
material to the digital tolerances we define that design is comfortable with, because they're designing digitally, right? So let's keep it in that medium. Why are we designing digitally and then pulling back out to the physical world and then trying to put it back in?
Hmm.
Leave it digital.
Right.
And that way it can just flow through the entire process. You save a ridiculous amount of time.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, what's the one
Yeah.
piece of advice you would give to a designer today?
Ooh, I got to pick just one.
You got to pick just one.
I got to pick just one. Just to be open, I think. So I recognize the fact. So I'm going to give you a really long-winded answer because I'm good like that. Um, I recognize the fact that design typically isn't, it's not part of their curriculum as a designer, or it's not historically, these aren't things that design is taught or exposed to, right? They're taught I'm going to make this up, I'm not a designer, but they're taught to harmonize colors, right? They're taught to
Right.
what colors go good together, visually. They're taught to use their set of design tools. They're not necessarily taught about delta tolerances and reflectance curves and
Hmm.
QTXs and all of these things.
Right.
Um, so don't be afraid when execution comes with defined tolerances for a color. That's not locking down your creativity. That's the color team, the execution group, being a steward of the color that you had selected, right?
Hmm.
So first and foremost, the execution team is trying to bring your vision to reality. by defining these metrics, right? Like a publisher of a book, making
Mhm.
sure that every word is where it should be in phonetically the right order and everything else like that. So the reader can get the story that you wanted, right?
Right.
And then also to be open to the fact that with now these tools in hand, if presented to you the right way in the software that you are using, that it actually really defines for you the colors that are available. And you can know
Right.
if it is a brand new color or if it's an existing standard. And if it's an existing standard, great, because now we know everything about it. And if it is brand new, great, because now you know that it's differentiated and you know it's new because nothing else matches it. So you can get a lot of, don't be afraid of analytics. Yeah, just be
A-
open to this information.
And I think for me, it's saying, look, if you're in design, if you don't know, ask a question.
Exactly.
These execution is about helping you execute your vision,
Yeah.
not limiting your vision. So ask the questions that you're curious about and understand it. You don't have to have the science degree on colors, but execution is a really good partner to
Mhm.
help you remove the shackles of your design so you can design more. And I think I'm trying to net that out for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean the fact that now, the analog really, it's not immediately apparent, but visually at the analog process is really limiting to design.
yep,
How long would it take a designer to sift through 10,000 colors
thousands.
across all of those trend services or all of those color services to find the color that they want? And by the time you did find it in one, maybe you forgot what the other 8,000 just looks like.
Exactly.
Um,
So it really helps.
yeah, I
It
mean, it
really
gives you
helps
it allows you to look for color in a way that you hadn't been able to do previously.
for it. It's freeing.
Yeah,
Ryan, thank you so much. We're going to
thank you.
continue and talk about visualization and
Mhm,
digitization of color so it gets even better
mhm.
and geekier,
Sweet.
so that you can actually see what's on the screen of your design in the right color. And there's some
Works for me.
really great tools. So we'll talk about that next time. Ryan, thank you very, very much for your time today.
Thank you, Shoshana. I appreciate it.
This is Shoshana Burgett from colorkarma.com. Have a wonderful day.